The end of the world feels like this. The sky burned red above Thermopylae, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath. 7,000 Greeks led by 300 Spartans stood against an ocean of men. 200,000 Persians pressing through the narrow pass called the Hot Gates. For 3 days, bronze and bone held back an empire. Then, in the stillness before dawn, the miracle shattered. The Persians stopped attacking. A whisper moved through the mountains. Someone had shown them another path, one man, one choice, and a name that would echo through eternity. Ephialtes. The nightmare. In Sparta, the first thing a child must survive is judgment. Before a boy can breathe the air of citizenship, elders inspect his body beneath the cold light of dawn. They look for symmetry, for strength, for the absence of flaw. A crooked limb, a trembling hand, even the suggestion of weakness, these are verdicts. Those deemed unfit are carried to the foot of Mount Taygetus, to the chasm known as the Ephialtes. There, the law of Lycurgos whispers, "Better the city be pure than pitied." Sparta does not nurture individuals, it sculpts a collective. Infants are weighed like iron, not kissed like sons. At 7, boys are torn from their mothers and placed in the agoge, a crucible where tenderness is starvation and pain is pedagogy. They sleep on reeds cut with their own hands, steal food to survive, and fight until their skin forgets the meaning of mercy. To falter is to be erased. It is in this city, worshipper of the body, executioner of imperfection, that the myth of Ephialtes begins. Herodotus, the father of history, never called him a hunchback. That detail was painted centuries later, an invention of storytellers seeking symmetry between deformity and betrayal. What Herodotus did record was simpler, colder. Ephialtes, the son of Eurydemos, of malice. A local man, not a monster, just a name among the hills near Thermopylae. Yet history has a cruel appetite for archetypes. It prefers villains with visible scars, as if deformity itself justifies treason. The truth may be less theatrical, more tragic. Ephialtes, scholars suggest, was not a Spartan citizen, but born of Spartan blood, a father from the south, a mother from the north, a family exiled for reasons now lost. In a land where identity is armour, he grew up with none. To the Spartans, perfection was proof of divine favour. The god Apollo embodied symmetry, strength was moral, weakness was sin. In such a world, to be imperfect was not merely to suffer, it was to be unholy. Ephialtes likely lived beneath that shadow, feeling the gaze of a society that measured worth in inches of muscle and scars won in battle. We know little of his childhood, but the silence itself speaks. No songs, no lineage, no comrades from the agoge. Perhaps he watched Spartan youth train from the edge of the plains, heard their war chants echo from the gymnasium, and imagined himself among them. Perhaps he was told, once and finally, that the city had no place for him. In the mountains, a man could vanish into anonymity. Shepherds, smugglers, hunters. These were lives lived without witnesses. But identity, once stripped, leaves a wound that never closes. Ephialtes carried his name like an accusation, his body as evidence against him. In a world that worshipped discipline, he embodied disorder. In a culture that revered silence, he carried the noise of rejection. When Leonidas later marched through his homeland, Ephialtes saw not just an army, but the ghosts of what he could have been, a phalanx of men moving as one living machine, each shield protecting the man beside it. That formation was more than strategy. It was faith made visible. And for a man raised on its mythology yet denied its embrace, it must have felt like seeing the gates of heaven closed forever. In the end, Sparta's cruelty forged him as surely as it forged its heroes. For every Leonidas sculpted from iron, there had to be an Ephialtes hammered from exile. The same fire that purified one consumed the other. Sparta made both. Imagine a father standing at the edge of the gorge, a baby in his arms. The elders have spoken. The child will not serve the city. His back curves, his legs tremble. The law demands the child's end. But the father, bound by something older than law, runs. He flees north through the forests of Laconia, carrying his son toward the hills of Malis. Behind him, Sparta's walls vanish. Before him, no one calls his name. That act, defying the city for love, costs him everything: his citizenship, his home, his comrades. In Sparta, the word citizen is sacred. Lose it, and you're not merely exiled. You are unmade. The boy grows up hearing the word Spartan, like a prayer whispered through closed doors. He learns of the phalanx from travellers, of the agog from stories told by men who once survived it. Each tale cuts deeper, a mirror showing him the life he should have lived. As he matures, the boy's resentment hardens into discipline. He trains alone with sticks, lifts stones, throws spears at tree trunks until his hands bleed. He learns the geography of his homeland better than any general, the curves of the mountains, the secret paths through pine and limestone. His body may be flawed, but his will is a weapon. The years turn. News drifts north. Persia has returned. Xerxes' armies march through Thrace and Thessaly, burning, demanding submission. Cities crumble, others kneel, but Sparta prepares. To a man like Ephialtes, this is destiny knocking, an opening to redeem himself, to prove that he too can be part of the unbroken wall. When Leonidas arrives at Thermopylae with his 300, the valley transforms. Smoke from the campfires paints the night orange. The clang of bronze echoes through the cliffs. Soldiers from Thebes, Thespiae, Corinth, all waiting under Spartan command. Ephialtes comes down from the hills to find them, wearing the same simple cloak, the same sandals as any man of his land. But within, he carries years of silence, of wanting to belong. He asks for what seems small yet monumental. Let me fight beside you. No gold, no favour, no recognition, only a place in the line. For a Spartan, that request is sacred. For Leonidas, it is impossible. The phalanx depends on unity. Each man's shield protects half his own body and half his neighbour's. One weakness can doom them all. Leonidas looks at him, not with hatred but with calculation. The king has no luxury for pity. Raise your shield, he commands. Ephialtes tries. The weight bends his back, the edge tilts, exposing a gap. In that moment, silence falls. The soldiers nearby turn their eyes away. The judgment is absolute. Leonidas speaks the verdict as law, not cruelty. You cannot. 2 words, sharper than any sword. Ephialtes' world collapses in the space between them. The dream that sustained him, belonging, redemption, honour, dies without a fight. Around him, bronze gleams, spears rattle, the disciplined heartbeat of men who are everything he wanted to be. The rejection burns deeper than any wound. When he turns away from the Spartan camp, something shifts in the mountain air, a vow unspoken yet absolute. If Sparta will not let him fight for it, the world will remember him another way, not as warrior, but as witness, as key, as consequence. In that vow, treason is not born of greed, but of grief. A grief that comes from being forever outside the circle of us. And history, brutal and honest, would prove him right. The Spartan camp at Thermopylae was no ordinary military post. It was a world reduced to essentials: discipline, rhythm, silence. Each man's armour gleamed under the dawn light, every motion rehearsed like a sacred ritual. The smell of bronze oil and burning pine filled the air. The phalanx was not simply an army. It was a moving temple built on precision. Ephialtes approached this temple as a supplicant. He had waited his whole life for this moment. Every scar, every hour spent training alone in the hills, had prepared him for the single act of being accepted, of being seen. When he entered Leonidas's presence, the king was inspecting the line of his soldiers. Tall, broad-shouldered, his beard streaked with grey, Leonidas looked less like a monarch than a mountain carved into human shape. His gaze was steady, measuring, void of vanity. He was the embodiment of Sparta's creed, strength through order. "Name?" the king asked. "Ephialtes, son of Eurydamas from Malis," came the answer. Leonidas nodded, recognizing the name of the region. "What do you want, Ephialtes?" The man's voice trembled, but his eyes burned. "A place among you. I can fight. I know the terrain. I can hold a spear, wield a sword. Only grant me a shield, my king." There was silence, the kind that makes men hold their breath. The shield in Sparta was not just a weapon. It was a covenant. It protected half of the bearer and half of his brother beside him. It symbolized unity, the law that the phalanx never breaks. A weak arm meant a breach in that sacred chain. Leonidas motioned to a hoplite. "Give him one." The bronze disc was heavier than Ephialtes had imagined. The polished surface caught the morning light, and for a second he saw himself reflected in it. Crooked, distorted. He gripped the handle, lifted it, tried to set it squarely beside the king. His back wavered. The edge dropped. A subtle murmur ran through the men. Leonidas's voice was low but final. "You cannot hold it. If you cannot hold, you cannot cover the man beside you, and if you cannot cover him, you condemn him." Ephialtes fell to his knees, the shield clattering beside him. "I'll fight in the rear then. I'll serve as porter, as scout, anything." The king's reply was not cruel, but cold with necessity. There is no rear in a Spartan line. Every man is the front. For a heartbeat their eyes locked. One man made of command, the other of desperation. Leonidas did not mock him. He pitied him in silence, which is worse. Then, with a gesture, the king dismissed him. As Ephialtes walked away, the clang of Spartan spears striking shields echoed like a verdict. The rejection was total. To the army he was invisible again. But something inside him refused to die. His humiliation fermented into clarity. If he could not join Sparta's wall, he could still alter its shape. He began to see the mountain differently, not as obstacle, but as opportunity. Above the narrow pass of Thermopylae lay an old trail used by shepherds, the Anapaea path. It wound through oak and pine, invisible from below, connecting the Gulf of Malis to the rear of the pass. To a local, it was no secret. To a foreign invader, it was salvation. And now Ephialtes knew something no Spartan did: how to break the unbreakable. History often paints betrayal as a moment of greed, but it begins as a moment of silence, when pride curdles into purpose. Humiliation is a slow poison. It doesn't kill, it corrodes. Ephialtes left the Spartan camp that night with his head bowed, the torchlight of their fires flickering behind him like the glow of a world that had banished him forever. The song of the Spartan flutes faded into the wind. In that darkness, a new kind of thought took root, a thought not of vengeance, but of vindication. Far to the north, the Persian encampment roared with life. Drums thundered like distant storms. Xerxes' army, an ocean of men and horses spread across the plain, tents gleaming with silk and gold. The Persian king's throne stood upon a high platform, surrounded by incense smoke and guards dressed like living statues. The empire had come to conquer, and now it stood at the gates of Greece, stopped by a few thousand men in bronze. Among the camp's visitors arrived a local, a man who spoke Greek, but with the accent of malice. He was brought before the generals. His cloak was worn, his face gaunt, his eyes restless. "You wish to see the great king?" the interpreter asked. "I can show him a path," Ephialtes replied. Those words moved through the tent like a spark. The generals glanced at one another. A path? The mountain was thought impassable. If true, this could change everything. When Ephialtes finally stood before Xerxes, he did not kneel immediately. The king of kings, draped in jewels, looked down at this ragged man, this Greek peasant who dared to meet his eyes. The silence stretched. Then Xerxes smiled. "You're not one of Leonidas's men," he said through the interpreter. "No," Ephialtes answered. "They would not have me." The irony was not lost on the Persians. The king leaned forward, intrigued. "And why should I take you?" Ephialtes raised his chin. "Because I can give you what no army of yours can take by force, a way through the mountain, a way to their backs." For a moment Xerxes studied him in silence. Perhaps he saw not a traitor, but a gift from the gods, proof that even Greek pride could be bought, not with gold, but with rejection. "Show me," the king said finally. The bargain was struck. That night Ephialtes led a detachment of the Immortals, the elite Persian guard, into the foothills. He walked ahead with a torch, the light trembling across rock and root. Behind him, thousands of soldiers moved like a serpent through the trees. He told himself he was not betraying Greece, he was correcting it. He would no longer be the malformed shadow in a perfect city. He would be the man who ended Sparta's myth, the one who showed that even gods of war could bleed. But as the path wound higher, the sound of distant battle below, the clash of shield and spear, echoed faintly through the gorge. Ephialtes paused, his chest tight. Down there, men were dying for something he once worshipped. For a heartbeat he hesitated. Then a Persian officer barked an order and the moment passed. From humiliation to purpose, from purpose to resolve, this was the alchemy of betrayal. By dawn, he would lead death itself through the mountains. Night fell heavy over Thermopylae. Below, the hot gate still burned with torchlight and the echoes of bronze. Above, a second war began, silent, cold, invisible. Ephialtes walked first, his torch shielded by his palm, the flicker revealing the nervous breath of the immortals behind him. 10,000 Persians, their armour blackened for stealth, moved like a living shadow through the pines. The mountain air smelled of resin and damp moss. Rocks shifted under their feet, dislodging pebbles that tumbled into the darkness. To the east, the sea whispered beyond the cliffs. The moon was a blade of silver, cutting faintly through the mist. Ephialtes knew this trail. The Anapaea path had been carved by shepherds, used by smugglers and hunters long before empires marched. It twisted along the spine of the mountain, narrow enough that two men could barely walk abreast. Every turn revealed another drop into oblivion, but to him it was familiar ground, his inheritance of exile. Behind him, the commander of the immortals whispered orders in Old Persian. They carried bows, curved swords, and small shields made for speed. To them, this was not battle, but hunt, and their prey was unaware. At a small plateau near the summit, the Phocians stood guard, 1,000 men from a local tribe posted there to block exactly this route. But days of quiet had dulled their vigilance. They slept under cloaks, their spears stacked in neat rows, believing the mountain secure. Ephialtes saw them first, their silhouettes faint against the firelight. He gestured to the Persian commander, who nodded. The archers knelt, stringing their bows. Then came the whispering hum of arrows slicing the night. The first volleys fell without warning. Men jerked awake, clutching wounds before their minds caught up. The Phocians scrambled for their weapons, confusion erupting like wildfire. Some shouted to hold the ridge, others ran uphill, thinking the Persians aimed to seize the high ground. But that was not the goal. While the Phocians fought shadows, Ephialtes led the immortals along a lower path that curved around the hill. The Persians flowed past the defenders like water through a broken dam. It was treachery in its purest form, not a dramatic confrontation, but the quiet redirection of fate. No trumpet, no clash, only the rhythm of thousands of sandals on stone. The mountain absorbed their noise, their torches hidden under the canopy. By the time the Phocians realized the truth, the enemy was already descending toward the rear of the pass. Below, Leonidas's camp stirred uneasily. The night had been too still, the silence too deep. Perhaps some instinct, that ancient sense warriors share before doom, warned them. The Spartan sentries reported faint movement in the distance, a shimmer of torchlight on the ridges. But no one could imagine that the impossible, the mountain's betrayal, was unfolding above them. Ephialtes kept walking. His torch burned low, its light trembling in the mountain breeze. He did not look back. Each step was a hammer driving the final nail into his own name. When dawn began to stain the eastern sky, the Persians reached the lower slope overlooking the Greek rear. Below them, the narrow pass still blazed with courage and defiance. The Spartans stood unbroken, unaware that destiny was descending behind them. The Anapaea path, harmless to the eye, invisible on any map, had become the knife that slit the throat of heroism. And Ephialtes, the outcast shepherd, had guided the hand that held it. The first sign came not from the mountain but from the sea. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of smoke from behind. Then a Phocian runner burst into Leonidas's camp, his voice breaking as he shouted, "They've passed the ridge! The Persians are behind us!" For a heartbeat, silence, the kind that swallows the air. Then chaos. Some allies, Thebans, Thespians, Corinthians, scrambled for orders. Others demanded retreat. Fear travels faster than thought. Men who had stood shoulder to shoulder for 3 days now felt the weight of inevitability. The perfect plan had been undone by something no shield could block. Betrayal. Leonidas listened, unmoved. Around him, the Spartans remained eerily calm. They had trained their whole lives for this moment, not victory, but clarity in the face of death. The king turned toward the east, where the first rays of dawn cut through the valley. "So it is done," he said quietly. The prophecies had foretold this. The oracle at Delphi had declared, either Sparta shall be destroyed, or one of her kings must die. Leonidas had always known which outcome he would choose. He ordered the allied contingents to withdraw, to carry the story of what had happened here, to warn the cities beyond. Most obeyed. The Spartans, Thespians, and a few Thebans stayed. They polished their shields, they tightened their sandals, they ate their rations slowly as if savouring the last mortal act of control. Ephialtes' treachery had made escape impossible, but it had also given them purpose. The narrow pass had turned into a tomb, and Leonidas chose to make it a monument. When the Persians descended from the hills behind, the Greeks did not scatter. They formed ranks, shields overlapping, spears angled toward the rising sun. The air trembled with anticipation. Down the slope came the immortals, Xerxes' elite soldiers, their gold-threaded armour glinting. The trap had closed perfectly. Persians pressing from the front, Persians emerging from the rear. To any general, this was the end. To Leonidas, it was the beginning of legend. He gathered his men. "Eat your breakfast," he told them, "for tonight we dine in Hades." The words rolled through the ranks, half grim humour, half prayer. The Spartans smiled, not with joy but with serenity. To die was not tragedy. To die unremembered was. In that final morning, Leonidas made a choice that broke every rule of Spartan warfare. Instead of holding the choke point, he advanced. He led his men out into the wider ground, straight into the heart of the Persian lines. The charge was not strategic. It was symbolic, a king leading his people into eternity. The Spartans moved as one, a wall of bronze cutting into a flood of flesh. The clash resounded like thunder trapped between cliffs. Persian arrows blotted out the sun. Still they advanced, spears splintering, swords flashing in arcs of light. Leonidas fought at the front until his spear broke. Then he drew his sword. When he fell, it was not to one blade but to 1,000, the weight of an empire crushing one mortal body. His soldiers fought over his corpse, retrieving it 3 times, each time leaving more of themselves on the ground. At last the Persians surrounded them completely. The few remaining Greeks retreated to a small mound near the pass, forming a final circle. Arrows rained down like night falling all over again, and when it was over, the hot gates were silent, except for the wind carrying the smell of iron, pine, and the faint echo of a name that would never leave history: Ephialtes. Thermopylae was lost, but something greater had been born. In the ashes of defeat, the idea of Greece, the belief that freedom was worth death, had found its martyrdom. And the man who made it possible would live forever, not in glory, but in infamy. The sun climbed, revealing what night had concealed, an empire surrounding a handful of men. The Persians stretched from sea to mountain, banners rippling like waves in a blood-red tide. The hot gates, once narrow and defensible, now lay open, a killing ground. And yet, the Spartans advanced. Leonidas led from the front, his bronze armour dulled by ash. He no longer fought to hold a pass, he fought to hold meaning. Each step forward was defiance against the mathematics of empire. Around him, the 300 and their allies moved as one machine, shield locking into shield, spear thrust after spear thrust. The Persians fell in heaps, their bodies forming barricades of flesh. To the Persians, this was slaughter. To the Greeks, it was a liturgy. The clang of bronze became a hymn, the rhythm of spears the beat of prayer. Men shouted the names of their sons, their wives, their city, each cry a bridge across mortality. The morning air shimmered with heat and smoke. The narrow earth beneath them had turned into mud mixed with blood. The Spartans pushed outward, carving terror into the ranks of men who had never imagined death could look so disciplined. Some chroniclers would later say Leonidas tried to reach Xerxes himself, to cut off the serpent's head. Whether true or myth, the image endures, a king breaking from the line, his broken spear in hand, cutting through the glittering ranks of the immortals. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then he fell. Not from cowardice, not from retreat, but from weight. the sheer gravity of bodies and destiny. His death did not scatter the Spartans, it solidified them. 3 times they fought to reclaim his body, dragging it back under a storm of arrows. 3 times the Persians drove them off. By midday, their spears were shattered. They fought now with swords, with fists, with teeth. No one asked for mercy. No one offered it. They retreated to a small hill near the pass, forming a final ring around their dead king. The Persians surrounded them in silence. Xerxes from his throne watched. He had been promised an easy victory, a god king crushing an ant's nest. Instead, he saw a handful of mortals turning annihilation into art. For the first time, he understood the danger of men who fight not to live, but to mean something. When he ordered the final volley, the sky darkened. Arrows fell like a black rain, and daylight ended for the last free men at Thermopylae. No trumpets, no surrender, only the sound of armour collapsing onto stone. By sunset, the hot gates were quiet again. The wind moved through the corpses like a sigh. Salt from the sea mingled with the iron of blood. The Persians buried their dead in trenches. The Greeks were left where they fell, a wall of flesh sealing their own legend. Somewhere in the hills above, Ephialtes may have watched. Perhaps he saw the smoke rise. Perhaps he smelled the victory he had purchased. But even victory has weight. The silence after such carnage is heavy enough to crush a man's soul. That night the Persians feasted. Wine flowed, music rose, yet every song carried beneath it a strange disquiet, the sense that something divine had been violated. They had killed the men, yes, but not the idea that had animated them. The Greeks had made of death a mirror, and in it, empire saw its own fragility. The hot gates were lost. But Thermopylae had already become immortal. When the dust settled, Xerxes surveyed the field. He had won the pass, but not the world. What should have been triumph tasted of ash. The king walked among the bodies, pausing at Leonidas. Even dead, the Spartans' face defied him, eyes open, lips curved in what looked almost like amusement. In fury, Xerxes ordered the body mutilated, the head cut off and displayed upon a stake. It was a god's tantrum performed by a man. Yet even this desecration changed nothing. The myth was already larger than the corpse. In the following days, the Persians advanced south. Cities burned, temples fell, but the Greeks did not kneel. Salamis would come, a sea turned into a trap, and later Plataea, where Persia's armies drowned in mud and memory. Thermopylae had not been the end of Greece, it had been its spark. And what of Ephialtes, the man who made it all possible? He appeared at the Persian camp soon after the battle, expecting glory. The soldiers recognized him instantly. Some bowed mockingly, others spat. To warriors, a traitor is never an ally, only a tool. Xerxes received him in a smaller tent this time, no throne, no ceremony. The man knelt. "I have done as promised, my king. The path was yours, the Greeks destroyed." Xerxes looked at him a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he gestured. A servant brought forward a pouch heavy with silver coins. The sound of metal clinking against metal filled the silence. "This," said the interpreter, "is your reward." No words of thanks, no titles, no army to command, just the hollow weight of payment. Ephialtes took the bag, but his hand shook. This was not what he had imagined. No applause, no respect, only eyes that turned away. To the Persians he was not a hero. To the Greeks, not a man. When the war turned against Persia, Xerxes retreated, leaving behind no monument, no remembrance. Ephialtes stayed behind in Greece, wandering from village to village, a ghost cursed to live among those who wished him dead. His name became a proverb. Mothers whispered it to frighten children. Poets spat it between verses of Leonidas's glory. The Greek council placed a bounty on his head, enough gold to buy forgiveness in another life. Years passed. No one cared to find him. His infamy was punishment enough. But fate, indifferent as ever, found him in a tavern in Trachis. A quarrel broke out over wine. A knife flashed. Ephialtes fell to the floor, bleeding out among strangers. Only afterward did his killer learn the name of the man he'd slain and claim the bounty, long forgotten but still valid. So ended the life of the most infamous name in Greek history. Ephialtes' story is not unique. Every age creates its outcasts, its broken mirrors of perfection. But his wound was deeper because it was national, a betrayal born inside the myth of unity. Greece would later build monuments to Leonidas and his men, their epitaph carved in immortal simplicity. Stranger, tell the Lacedaemonians that we lie here obedient to their laws. No stone bears Ephialtes' name, and yet, in a strange way, they are forever linked, one remembered for courage, the other for its absence. Both proved the same truth, that the line between glory and infamy is drawn not by gods, but by belonging. Xerxes gained a path, but lost his invincibility. Sparta lost men, but gained eternity. Ephialtes gained silver, and lost himself. History has no mercy for those who live between definitions. In every retelling, the camera pans to the mountain path at night. The flicker of a torch, the sound of distant hooves, the face of a man half in shadow. That is where treachery lives, not in the heart of monsters, but in the silence of the excluded. The untold reason was never gold. It was not ambition, nor Persian persuasion. It was belonging, or the absence of it. Ephialtes was not born a villain. He was carved into one by the hands of a society that worshipped perfection and punished deviation. In Sparta, a man's worth began and ended with his body. Muscles were morality. Balance was destiny. A bent spine was not a medical condition. It was a moral flaw. For men like Leonidas, the city gave purpose, brothers, honour, and immortality. For Ephialtes, it gave exile. He lived outside the walls but inside their shadow, condemned to witness glory as if it were sunlight through a crack in stone. When he betrayed the Greeks, he was not trading loyalty for money. He was reclaiming significance in a world that had refused to acknowledge his existence. His treason was the twisted form of participation, his way of finally being part of the story. That is the cruel paradox of exclusion. Deny a man recognition long enough, and he will seek it in destruction. The society that makes him invisible also makes him dangerous. Sparta's discipline produced heroes, but it also produced this. The same system that taught men to die without fear taught another man that death in obscurity was worse than sin. Leonidas and Ephialtes were reflections in the same mirror, one exalted for his obedience, the other damned for his defiance. Both were, in their way, products of the same perfectionist creed. The world loves simple categories, heroes in light, traitors in darkness. But history's truth lies in the blur between them. The human heart is not made of marble, it cracks, and when it does, light seeps through the fractures. After Thermopylae, the Greeks called Ephialtes a nightmare, but nightmares are born from fear, and what they feared was the reminder that their system, their law, their idea of beauty, could create monsters by omission. In the long shadow of that mountain, the story repeats itself across centuries. Every empire, every kingdom, every nation builds its own Thermopylae, a place where loyalty is tested, and someone always stands outside the circle. The form changes: caste, class, creed, defect, belief. But the wound is the same. To understand Ephialtes is not to absolve him. It is to recognize the cost of belonging. The Spartans were not gods, they were men. And men, when they divide their world into the perfect and the rejected, sow their own undoing. When the poet Simonides wrote of the fallen, he immortalized the law of sacrifice. Go tell the Spartans that we lie here, obedient to their word. But there is no inscription for the one who led the enemy through the dark. His name is his epitaph. Ephialtes, the word that in Greek still means nightmare, and yet in that nightmare hides a mirror for every age. For every time we decide who belongs and who doesn't, who is pure enough, strong enough, worthy enough, we rebuild the same narrow pass. We guard it with pride until the excluded find a way around. Sparta won eternal memory through death. Ephialtes won eternal infamy through survival. Both reveal a single truth. No civilization can stand if it demands perfection and gives no mercy to the imperfect. Because in the end, the walls we build to protect ourselves, of purity, of pride, of strength, do not keep the enemy out. They keep empathy out, and when empathy dies, the next Ephialtes is already being born in the dark. The mountains of Thermopylae are quiet now. The sea still breathes against the rocks where 300 men made time pause. But if you listen in the wind, you can still hear two names, Leonidas and Ephialtes, forever locked in the same echo, one remembered for what he defended, the other for what he revealed.